So, yes, I'm Corinne Card, and I spoke at the recent Brighton SEO about podcasting, but at a previous one I spoke about digital PR on a budget, which is my favourite topic. I love it because I used to be a national news journalist, and then since then I've moved into marketing, and they've kind of joined up in digital PR, which is helping get online visibility through the press. And I want to talk to you today about how to do it on a small business budget. So big companies can spend millions trying to get the right kind of attention from the press and from the public, but it doesn't always go to plan. So in 2017, you might remember, Pepsi enraged the world with a campaign that implied their drink could quell the fury at a Black Lives Matter protest, undermining and hijacking the entire cause. It was a very expensive ad campaign, poorly judged. Then in September of the same year, Nikon launched their new camera with a separate campaign where they asked the world's best photographers to try out their new camera. The problem was, it turned out they'd asked 32 men and 0 women to try out this camera, leading to a backlash against the brand. And something connects those two stories, and that is both brands, with all their massive budgets, they'd failed to take the perspective of a significant portion of their audience. And perspective taking can be powerful. Social psychologist Adam Galinsky explains that when I take your perspective and I think about what you really want, you're much more likely to give me what I really want. So what can you give how can you take someone's perspective in a way that will help you get press and links and online visibility for your business? I'm going to give you 5 tools that are going to really help you do this. So first of all, does anyone recognise this photo? It's been all over the nationals. It's a photograph of Meghan Markle, on the railings outside Buckingham Palace, when she was just 15 years old. And this is a photo that tells a story that's really interesting to people who see it. I mean, it's kind of fascinating that happened. And journalists love photos, and it's something that a lot of marketers forget, and even PR people, just how valuable, high quality and storytelling photos can be. So you want to get these right. You want to think about photos in a way that the newspapers will want them. And we recently started working with a national newspaper photographer called Andrew Hassan, and he talks about this because he's worked so long with all the national papers. He's got loads of weird and wonderful tips, like what colour do you not want to be wearing in your photo? Possibly green. Black and white. He said, don't choose black and white because the newspapers are black and white, and so you might be looking for online visibility, but the papers are going to be printing in print as well as online, and if everything's black and white, that's boring to look at. Not only that, don't have all your photos looking in one direction, because if they happen to have got lots of photos of people looking in one direction, they can't do that. You can't have it's weird. Nobody wants to flick through the newspaper with everyone looking the same. Anyway, there's tons of stuff like that newspaper photographers know, and you just wouldn't think of if you're taking photos. So that's a good reason to get someone who works with papers and hire them to do your photos of ideally the founders of your company. And a good way to do that on a small business budget is to call up your local paper, because they're going to have freelance photographers that they work with regularly, and they've already done the research to find people who can do it at a really good price. So yeah, speak to the photo desk. And it's weird, they're happy to recommend people. So we did this when we started our company. So I'm founder of Full Story Media, co-founder. I'm here with my co-founder, John. He's a Guardian journalist, but also works with me to help companies get press and train them in doing so. So we did this with the Argus. We thought, what photo will tell the story of our business? Well, we work in Brighton. We do things to do with media, and so we sent them this along with the story of our launch, and they published it. So we got that free coverage in the Argus straight away. Here is somebody who's launched a company called Handsteady. Now, he's called Chris Peacock, and my husband worked with him because he was writing a story for The Guardian. Now, Chris called up and said, what should I do for photos? I don't have any pictures. And John said to him, try and do something that tells the story of your company with a picture. Get your product in there, if you can. And luckily, he was able to do that. So he got the box, he got the cup, and that told such a good story that The Guardian chose him and chose his photo to be a page lead in The Guardian. So quite a simple tip that. Just somehow tell the story of your company. And it might be that it's a bit trickier, like you might not have a product that naturally lends itself to that. But there are ways of still doing so. So this entrepreneur tackles climate change with microalgae, and it's quite difficult, the idea of getting a photo of that. But fortunately for him, the Victoria and Albert Museum had a sculpture that with his microalgae that he was able to get photographed with. And there's something quite beautiful about that photo there. But there's usually a way to integrate your company with your story. But another way that you can use photos is that you can get your users or people interested in your brand to send you photos. And that's a cheap way to do a digital marketing campaign, a digital PR campaign, is to run a competition. So this photo competition is run by a safety-related company who said, how can you do safe selfies at a time when there were people doing very dangerous ones? So this photographer climbs mountains, and he wrote about how he took a safe selfie on a mountain, and that got published by the BBC because this is where he lived. And the thing is that however big an organisation is, a publication is, they know their readers, they know what they'll be interested in, and if it's something in their location or something connected with them, then that's a photo they'll want to use. So this is what finally got the company I was working with, a blue chip company, a link from the BBC, and it wasn't even a photo of them. Photos work, and another way that they can work is with gift guides. So there are hundreds and hundreds of requests for photos and products for gift guides, and I've learned this because I get the journalist requests from all the different journalists through Response Source. So if you've got a product that is a tangible thing and it could conceivably be a gift, get photos of those products, high quality ones, on a white or transparent background, because then you can send those off to these publications when they're looking for photos for their gift guides, and white or transparent background, because then they can do all the different possible gifts for whatever it is, Valentine's Day, Christmas, all together. And so you don't want the lifestyle shots in like a field, just with nothing behind. So this is an example client I worked with who sold high quality bags, and the Daily Mail wanted the type of gifts you give to someone who has everything already. And it worked really well for that article, but I had to send that over within an hour to get in there, because a lot of the time they just have to quickly do a story, and you have to be so quick to get the information across to them. Not always, but it's always good to be within an hour of when the request comes through. And it's by doing this, responding to journalist requests, that we got coverage and links from all these places for one small company that didn't have, a huge story to tell, but was just able to respond to journalist requests regularly and effectively and fast. And I've mentioned Response Source. So this is another way that you can take the perspective of the press by actually learning what they're after. So I say Response Source, that's one of several different ways that you can find out. And you've probably heard of Harrow, Help Report Out, Source Bottle is another one, the journal request hashtag on Twitter. But I love Response Source particularly because you get a lot of information. You have to pay for a subscription, unfortunately, but that means the competition is lower than with the free ones as well. You can get a free trial of a week in a category that's relevant to your business and find out if it's something that is going to work for you. And it's easy to get a call with the people who work there and sort of say, what category will be relevant for my business? So here, journalists send out queries to all of the PR people and marketers and business owners who are signed up to Response Source. And they hope to get, enough information back, or photos, or whatever they need for their articles. But what tends to happen is they get way, way too much. If it's for if it's for the Telegraph, something, and John Much for the Guardian, he does this, he can get hundreds of responses. But I've learned that if you get back within the hour and you give them exactly what they've asked for, they're much more likely to see your email and to use what you've sent them. And this is because they don't know they're going to get hundreds. They might think they are, but when they send it out, naturally, the first emails that come through go, oh, somebody's replied. But once it's a few hours later, a day later, you're then in that huge list of responses. Probably won't see you. Any questions about that?
Do they pay you for your images or information? How does that work?
No.
It's just
Lots of people think that, yeah. So it's all to get exposure, yeah. So another way to take the perspective of the press and the journalists who are looking for content is to be a bit ahead of the game and to predict the future. So by doing this, you can be the clever person who's created a campaign that's already ready for when the journalists, when their boss says, I need a story about this thing that's coming up. So say Local Business Week, which is next week, turns out. We've got a client who's really relevant for Local Business Week, had the ability to survey their customers, and we found out that their customers were struggling with certain elements of actually online visibility, and it turned out that we were able to get 2,000 responses, which is a good number, saying that they were struggling with these elements of online visibility and relevant for Local Business Week. So we put that information together with quotes, really interesting quotes from the founder of the company, and sent it out yesterday, and immediately got replies from the BBC and ITV, not because it's a brilliant story, but it's very relevant now with Local Business Week coming up, and it's got that fresh information from their users. Another example was when the penalties increased for using a mobile phone while driving. So that we knew that that was going to happen. Everyone had been told the law was going to come into force, but nobody knew the date that it was going to come into force. So I called up the Department of Transport and found out the date, that it hadn't been published anywhere, and we were able to use all that time that we knew we had to prepare this infographic and to put together some more information and quotes in a survey to then send out to all the papers. It got published by everyone because it just made that information easier to consume, which was available online but in a really dry, boring way on the government website. So predicting the future with the information available to you, things that are relevant to your business, and then you can prepare things in advance. And another way to take the perspective of the press is to think about how you can provide them with everything they need for their story, which is quite a few things, but it's repetitive. It's usually the same things. So the first thing is you need to be able to write the news in the way that they'll publish it, ideally, so that it saves them time and it saves them the effort of rewriting something. And the first thing you need for a news story is it has to be new. And a lot of people get this wrong. They write a story about, this company, your company perhaps, launched in this year and has done all these interesting things. That's fine, but what's new now? And launch can be a really good time to send out a press release because something's just happened, your company's launched, but there will be these milestones, and ideally something that's going to be interesting to the general public. Or it might be that you connected with, as I said, something that's happening and is relevant to your business. So have that calendar of events that are recurring each year, awareness days, that kind of thing. Really, it does work if you do it right. Also, to write the news, you need to use the standard inverted pyramid. Does anyone recognise that? So the inverted pyramid of news, at the top you have all the most relevant information about the story, so that you can understand it just from those first couple of lines. And that's really important because first of all, you want the journalist to be able to work out whether or not it's a story for them. But it's also the way, if you read news stories, that all news stories are published. At least in this country, I think in most places, they have this pretty cool system. And once you've learned it, it's quite hard to write at first. Once you've learned it, it comes quite naturally. But the very most important thing is your headline. And to come up with a headline, a good way to do it is to think about if you had to run to the top of a hill to meet a friend you haven't seen in a long time, and quickly, with a few breaths you've got left, tell them what the story is. That's your headline. So you might want to be clever and have a pun in your headline. Well, I'd usually advise against that. The journalist reading your story wants to know what the story is first and foremost. And if it's for the Sun or something, they'll probably make it a silly headline, but they'll need to know what the story is. And the last of these 5 ways of taking people's perspective is to appeal to communities. So we're talking about, Megan was talking about influencer marketing, and appealing to communities is a really effective way, especially now when they're so visible online, to take the perspective of, well, it's sort of taking the perspective of the press, but it's taking the perspective of how your story can run and run and run. So how can your story appeal to more than one groups of people? How can you interest them? How long have I got? Am I running over? So an example of this is Kyra Worrell. I don't know if you've heard of her. Local girl. She was born with one leg a little bit shorter than the other. And as she grew, it caused more and more problems. The only answer that the National Health Service offered was to amputate the shorter leg as it became more and more troublesome. But Kyra's family looked far and wide and found a doctor called Dr. Paley, who was able to lengthen legs, but it would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to do it. So it was crucial to get their first surgery really quickly, and they had to raise over £50,000 within a couple of months. They launched a crowdfunding campaign, but also asked for our help. And we wrote a story about Kyra. We got all the most important information in. We got an emotive headline and lots and lots of details all about Kyra, the surgery, including information about the doctor, as much detail as possible, but also making it really clear what the story was right from the top, and not including any other complicated words, which there were many in the headline. There's very simple words there. Brighton mum vows to fight to save her daughter's leg. Everybody knows what that means. Now, when we sent this out, the next day a little news story is published, which is always good. So Brighton Hove News published a story, and we were like, okay, somebody's got it. That's good, because we wanted the story to just kind of grow and grow. That's how we expected it to happen as the crowdfunding went on. And after this, it went into more and more places. The BBC asked them onto the radio, and okay, this was good. So the local press had become interested, and that actually helped get more and more interest from the people around Kyra, who are like, okay, so this is really, wow, it's a really big deal. Yeah, we'll help more. And there are more and more volunteers. It was still a struggle to get towards that £50,000. But something interesting happened. So we'd included so many details. One of the details in the story that the surgeon was Israeli, and the operation was going to happen in Israel. So it turned out this was interesting to a journalist who repurposed the story for the Jewish Chronicle. And this is a really well-read publication. And from here, it just took off. So this is now, it started to be from a different angle. Very important that Kyra was going to Israel. The surgeon was Israeli. And so there was an additional incentive for people to share the story. People who were Jewish, it was like, this is really important, and this surgeon is going to do this great thing. And it went all over the world via the Jewish press, which we didn't expect, but because we'd included so many details that could appeal to different communities, it was able to take off. And it got bigger and bigger. Now Kyra is actually having her main surgery in Miami, which is nice for the family. they've managed to raise all the money, and it's been in the Daily Mail and the Mirror, and yeah, so it's a great story, but it just shows how stories can build and build, and it's not just the one thing that you initially thought you're going for. There's Kyra happy having her operation. So these are the 5 tips that I gave, and I hope that was helpful. We do training sessions, and we work with companies to help them build their digital PR and help them get press and media attention. So thanks for listening.